I made note of that, Eric, and I also made note that the jury could come back in the trial of the Utah doctor charged with killing his wife as early as this week. The case enters its fourth week this week, and prosecutors say Dr. Martin MacNeill murdered his wife with a cocktail of prescription drugs back in 2007 so that he could pursue a relationship with, well, his mistress, but she was the family nanny. It gets complicated. But he denies all of it, and he's pled not guilty. And last week, the case taking another dramatic turn when the medical examiner testified that the mother of 8 may have died as a result of drowning. Listen.
If you were to learn that the defendant here had told somebody or others that he had drugged up Michelle MacNeill and convinced her to get into the tub and held her down for a little bit, and it caused her death, would that scenario be consistent with how Michelle MacNeill may have died here?
Yes, certainly it's possible.
A lot of experts, a lot of coroners in this case. And joining me is Robert Schalk and Doug Burns, both defense attorneys and former prosecutors. Ooh, we get a lot of bang for our buck this morning, guys. Thanks so much for being here.
Pleasure.
Let me start with this, because I've been following this trial, and I think it's very interesting. I can't imagine, folks, anything more compelling than this. The daughter, who was with her mom 24 hours before she died, is a medical student and was on the stand saying this.
Why were you seeking information as to your mother's death?
Because I believed my father killed her.
Objection, Your Honor. Move to strike.
Overruled.
Overruled. Doug?
Every trial I've ever been in, and I'd love to get my colleagues' point of view, I think that would have been sustained. I think it would have been stricken out. You can't have somebody say, I think that Mr. X did something. You need evidence and facts. Now, having said that, I'm going to completely reverse course and agree with you, Jamie, which is, oh my God, how compelling and devastating is it?
The jury heard
I'm not laughing.
She's a medical student. She was there. Her
Exactly.
mother, she says.
Not even that, just the family dynamic. In 99% of trials, family members are supporting the defendant. Here you have a child coming in saying, I think he did it. I mean, it's pretty devastating. But I wouldn't have allowed it in if I were the judge.
Let's check your co-counsel.
I agree with Doug. I wouldn't have let it in, and I'm very surprised that the judge did. It's obvious by her testimony that she thinks her father did it. She wouldn't be testifying. And the most important thing for me is that the mother said to her when she was visiting, when she believes her to be over-medicated and she's a medical student, she can detect that your father was giving me, just forcing pills in my mouth, and I actually got sick and threw those pills up. That type of evidence that the father was giving her pills, forcing them in her mouth, is great evidence for the prosecution.
So they bring in a third coroner.
Yes.
Dr. Perper, who we all remember from the Anna Nicole Smith investigation.
Yes,
remember
right.
being down in Florida outside of his office. And he's written a book. Interesting book. Let's put it up to show all of you, because this is a theory of the prosecution when doctors kill, that they have special skills. Let me ask you about this, that they can actually have ease in terms of over-medicating. But Dr. Perper actually ended up helping the defense.
Well, he did, because you have 3 autopsies now. The first initial autopsy, that coroner, that doctor has now passed away. Her boss then reviews it, and now Dr. Perper. Every single one of them, no one says this is a homicide. No one says homicide in their report, and that is the biggest piece, that's the biggest hurdle that the prosecution has in this case, and the biggest piece of evidence that the defense has to utilize to raise that reasonable doubt standard, that no one can tell you how this happened.
Doug, she had a heart condition.
Yep.
The initial autopsy was that she died of natural causes in that tub. Then she died of a drowning. Then it was a combination. How does the jury decide?
It's a very hard case to handicap. We've been saying this all along. It's like right out of the law school mock trial notebook, because you can argue it vehemently in both directions. But I think where he's really in harm's way, seriously, is that, you know, there's a very compelling point that Bob referenced, which is, look, you don't have a clear medical analysis of how the woman died. So how are you going to prove beyond a reasonable doubt what happened? I agree with all that.
And you have to, because he faces potentially life in prison. And there's the bathtub. It reminds me so much of the Drew Peterson case with wife number 3, where she died in a dry bathtub.
But let me just say one thing. He was texting aggressively during her funeral to his girlfriend. That's number 1. And number 2, he proposed marriage 2 weeks after his wife died. With nothing more than those two facts, a jury could convict you, in my opinion.
Well, the defense will argue
No, I'm
he was
serious.
getting on with his life. Prosecution argues, like in Drew and Scott Peterson's case, he acted strangely. Casey Anthony went dancing at a club as well. Let me just ask you this finally.
Sure.
They will put, and they plan to put, 4 inmates on the stand to say that he's been incarcerated, that he admitted that he killed his wife, and he believes that police will never figure it out. Does that cheapen the case or actually bolster the prosecution? What credibility do these inmates have?
Not
That's what
really,
I wonder.
but here's the issue. It's not 1, it's 4. And if it was 1, I think it would cheapen it a tremendous amount, because defense attorneys have a field day with snitches, however you want to call them, jailhouse rats, whatever word you want to term them. That's what they're going to be called.
The argument is, look, if they could have come in here and proven beyond a reasonable doubt that he did the murder, they would have. Otherwise, they call jailhouse snitches.
But they can't.
However, I think you're right. You bring in 4 people, said the guy confessed to me, you're in harm's way, big time.
Right, because you have 4 people who are going to come in and say he admitted it to me, and then you add it to everything else Doug and I have talked about, the texting, the odd behavior.
You're
it just
both
doesn't
leaning
add up.
toward conviction?
I was telling Bob before we came out that I think they're looking at a hung jury.
All right. I have
No?
to go. They tell me I don't have time. I say he walks.
No, I don't
It's
disagree.
So sad for the family if that's the case, but we will watch this one closely. Guys, great debate. Thank you
Jamie.
so much.
My pleasure, Jamie.
Eric?
All right, Jamie. Well, you know, we just went through that government shutdown. Now the clock is ticking toward the next deadline. A budget deal needed in 73 days, January 15th. Up next, are we going to have to go through all this all over again?
Right now, we're in the budget negotiations. We got to get the government funded for the year. We need to deal with basic issues of oversight of government. And I think that's what it's all about. And it's frankly a problem for both parties.